Welcome to this episode. When tourists visit Africa south of the Sahara, they see just modern buildings, and they often wonder, why are there no historical buildings or monuments? The reason is quite simple. Europeans destroyed most of them. We only have a few drawings and descriptions by travelers who visited these cities before their destruction. In some places, ruins are still visible. So there continues to be this false narrative in which Africa was this really rural place devoid of city life and urban living until the European colonial invasions of the 19th century rescued the continent from the claws of ignorance and barbarism and bring with them the glories of civilization. But Africa's humongous urban history, far older than that of any other continent, and of which massive evidence abounds throughout the continent, including possibly hundreds of still undiscovered cities buried underneath the sands of Africa for the last few thousand years, some of which are being discovered as we speak, plus documented eyewitness evidence by countless medieval foreign visitors to the continent, all clearly expose the falsehood of that narrative. So today we have here the African History Station's top 10 African cities which existed before the Europeans invaded the continent looking for people to enslave and colonize. Kumbi was the capital of the famous Ghana Empire and is situated in southern Mauritania. Archaeological evidence suggests that the city was a major hub for trade in gold, iron and salt. The earliest known author to mention Ghana was the Persian astronomer Ibrahim al-Fazari, who, writing at the end of the 8th century AD, refers to the territory of Ghana, the land of gold. The urban planning of Kumbi was complex and very well organized. The city was divided into two main areas, the royal palace and the commercial district. The palace was located on a raised platform and was surrounded by a moat. The commercial district consisted of a large central market and numerous smaller markets that specialized in specific goods. Some very significant archaeological discoveries at Kumbi include the discovery of large numbers of coins, ceramics, and glassware. The city had extensive trading links with other regions such as East and North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the area known today as the Middle East. Some of the coins were minted in locations as far away as Baghdad, providing evidence of the far-reaching trade networks that once existed in West Africa. According to ancient scholar al-Bakri, the city of Ghana consists of two towns situated on a plain. The houses of the inhabitants are of stone and acacia wood. The king has a palace and a number of domed dwellings, all surrounded with an enclosure like a city wall. Around the king's town are domed buildings and grooves. The archaeological excavations at Kumbi have provided valuable insight into the political, economic and social structures of the Ghana Empire. The city's ruins and ancient artifacts have been recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, and ongoing research continues to shed light on the rich history of this capital of one of Africa's greatest empires. The city of Mbanza-Congo was the political and spiritual capital of the Kingdom of Congo, one of the greatest kingdoms of southern Africa, and thrived from the 14th to the 19th century, that's 500 years. Located on a plateau, it was highly prosperous when the Portuguese arrived in 1488. According to scholars, the Portuguese arrived at the mouth of the Great Congo River in 1488 and ignorantly were not prepared to find highly advanced states there. The Kingdom of Congo was their first great surprise because its political structure and expertly organized administrative machinery equaled that of Portugal or any other European state known to them, according to Chancellor Williams in his famous work, The Destruction of Black Civilization. When the Portuguese arrived in Congo, Mbanza-Congo was already a large city, and a letter from the Portuguese ambassador to Lisbon compared the size of the city to the Portuguese town of Évora, wrote Dom Pedro. Mbanza-Congo was the capital of a Congo kingdom which was developed with a large commercial network. The kingdom melted copper and gold and traded with products such as raffia cloth and pottery. The kingdom was a superpower and center of trade routes for ivory, copper, raffia cloth and pottery, very well designed. The city is depicted in this 16th century drawing, a vast planned city of 100,000 people, of linear layout, stretching across several miles and surrounded by city walls bustling with trade. The king's complex alone was a mile-and-a-half enclosure with courtyards and gardens. The people of Mbanza-Congo had used mathematics not just for arithmetic purposes but for astrological calculations. They used advanced mathematics and linear algebra. The city also had great structures like the Manikongo Palace and the Nsudi Stone and several other monuments which were destroyed in the 19th century, but its ruins still stand today, providing a glimpse into the grandeur of the kingdom. The ruins of Great Zimbabwe are visited by thousands of tourists every year. The word great distinguishes the site from the many smaller ruins known as Zimbabwe's spread across the Zimbabwe country. There are 200 such sites in southern Africa, such as the Bumbusi ruins in Zimbabwe and Manyikeni in Mozambique, with monumental stone walls. Spread over 80 hectares of land, the city of Great Zimbabwe was the capital of the Shona Empire and is dated to the 11th century, although there is evidence that the area was inhabited since the 4th century. The word Zimbabwe comes from the Shona word for stone houses. At its peak, this great city is believed to have had up to 20,000 inhabitants and to have been an important centre for trade networks extending as far as China. The Zimbabwean Empire elite controlled trade up and down the east coast of Africa. Its outer walls were made from 100,000 tons of granite bricks. When Europeans discovered the ruins of Great Zimbabwe in 1871, they were so stunned by the complexity and sophistication of the city that they claimed it must have been built by ancient visiting Europeans, because in their view, Africans were incapable of such sophisticated architecture. It was only by the 1950s, after the Europeans had spent millions of dollars in feverish investigations and research at the site, looking for signs of foreign influence to no avail, that they finally gave up and admitted that the city was of 100% African origin, design and construction, with absolutely no foreign influences whatsoever. The city of Great Zimbabwe declined by the late 15th century after over 400 years of peace and prosperity. This great and epic African city was declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1986. The presence of microliths suggests that Zanzibar has been home to humans for at least 20,000 years, which was the beginning of the later Stone Age. The city of Zanzibar, which is an island, was settled by Bantu speakers and by the 10th century was a major trading centre in East Africa, heavily involved in intra-African coastal trade along the East African coast. By the 13th century, houses were built with stone and bonded with clay, and the 14th century saw the use of lime to bond stone. Now, Western historians tend to attribute the architecture of Zanzibar and other ancient Tanzanian cities to Arabs, simply because Arabs traded with the country at some point, and a small number of Arabs settled there in the past, which was nothing new, since Arabs have always traded with and settled all across West Africa in their history. But more serious scholars have stated, after sustained investigations of the ruins of Zanzibar, that the architectural style of these stone houses have no Arab or Persian element and should be viewed as an entirely indigenous development of local vernacular architecture. From the 9th century, Swahili merchants in Zanzibar operated as brokers for long-distance traders from both the hinterland of Africa and foreigners across the Indian Ocean. Persian, Indian and Arab traders travelled to Zanzibar to acquire gold and ivory and ship them overseas to Asia. Similarly, caravan traders from the African Great Lakes and Zambezi region came to Zanzibar to trade for imported goods such as Indian cloth. Zanzibar was just one of the many autonomous city-states that dotted the East African landscape in the medieval world. These cities grew in wealth as the Swahili people served as intermediaries and facilitators to merchants and traders from all over the world. So it was an extremely vibrant economy and society around Zanzibar prior to foreign invasions of the city, which began occurring in the 17th and 18th centuries by Arabs and later on Europeans. Kerma was the capital of the ancient Kingdom of Kerma, which thrived from 2500 BC to 1500 BC and is located in modern-day Sudan. It was one of the earliest complex societies in Africa and at its height rivaled ancient Egypt. Kerma was a large, walled metropolis that reached a population of around 20,000 inhabitants at its height. The city consisted of a system of planned roads that connected the residential areas and the necropolis. Kerma was built around a large temple known as the Western Defufa. The patient and diligent work of researchers unearthed the foundations of numerous houses, workshops and palaces, proving that as early as 2000 BC, Kerma was a large urban centre, presumably the capital city and the burial ground of the kings of Kush, according to scholars. The golden age of Kerma was from 1750 to 1480 BC. Monumental, large-scale works were undertaken in the city and the necropolis. A port was established south of the city. 2 large temples of more than 40 meters tall were erected in the necropolis, where the last royal structures demonstrate the power of the kings. The Kerma culture was based in the southern part of Nubia and later extended its reach northwards into the border of Egypt. According to researchers, Kerma was evidently a sizable political entity. Egyptian records speak of its rich and populous agricultural regions. Unlike Egypt, Kerma seems to have been highly centralized. It controlled the first to fourth cataracts, which meant its domain was as extensive as ancient Egypt. The recent discovery of the ruins of the magnificent city of Dukigel in Sudan caused an absolute sensation in the archaeological community. They found a large city buried in the Sahara Desert with a unique, sophisticated architecture dated to at least 2500 BC, roughly 5,000 years ago. This city is at the ancient site of Dukigel in modern-day Sudan. It was a discovery that provides clear, undeniable evidence that an advanced Black African civilization inhabited the Sahara long before pharaonic Egypt. At Dukigel, dozens of circular and oval buildings were unearthed whose architecture bears witness to a meticulous and spectacular construction tradition for its era. With up to 1,400 columns and numerous ceremonial palaces, the ancient settlement is just an absolute sight to behold, with artistic reconstructions of its edifices by experts indicating a hugely impressive urban society. Some researchers speculate that it was a military base or outpost of the Kushite Empire, and there's more excavation work going on because it is believed that there is a lot more of African civilization to find under the once fertile desert sands of the continent. According to Swiss archaeologist Charles Bonnet, Professor Emeritus at the Institut de France, who has spent a lot of time investigating Nubian civilization, the architecture of Dukigel is very different from that of the typical Nubian city. Instead of quadrangular buildings, we find many monuments with oval or circular plans that are unknown in Nubia and Egypt. On the other hand, a chamber 6 meters thick and doors made of 2 towers represent a unique and fascinating building system. A second walled enclosure must have existed outside to define a protected space, which were found the palaces of considerable size. And UNESCO, which has made Dukigel a World Heritage Site, states that its foundations pertaining to the Kerma Classic period display architecture not yet seen anywhere else, especially oval and circular temples and palaces of surprising size. Dukigel was a neighbor of Kerma, which we earlier spoke about. Of Dukigel, Charles Bonnet writes that the architecture of Dukigel remains unrivaled, since no other urban center from this period has yet been found in central Sudan. However, a first observation can be made after some 8 years of study. The architecture of the city clearly reflects great complexity and a concern with building in a specific way that relies on and reflects an exceptional mastery of craftsmanship that was centuries in development. Nonetheless, the analysis of the buildings is only in its early stages and will take several generations to complete, as there are doubtless many other examples to identify. He concludes, "It is thus through architecture that we might be able to identify the 3 currents of influence in the region. The cultures of Central Africa appear to have played a major role throughout the history of the Nubian kingdom, although it will perhaps take the discovery of the main ancient sites of the continent for scholars to better appreciate the origins of the sub-Sahelian kingdoms. However, Dukigel apparently displays an impressive urban development. One can imagine that the power of Central Africa is yet to be discovered, and that explorations in Sudan represent a crucial point in understanding of the advancement of people over a very large and still unknown territory." Benin City was the capital of the Benin Empire, founded in 700 AD, and was one of the greatest cities of ancient Africa. Situated in the southwest of modern-day Nigeria, Benin City was ranked by visitors as being among the world's most beautiful and best-planned cities throughout the 15th and 16th centuries. A Portuguese captain describing the city in 1691 said, "Great Benin, where the king resides, is larger than Lisbon. All the streets run straight and as far as the eye can see. The houses are large, especially that of the king, which is richly decorated and has fine columns. The city is wealthy and industrious. It is so well governed that theft is unknown, and the people live in such security that they have no doors to their houses." In the 1500s, the Benin Empire exchanged ambassadors with Portugal, a major trading partner. The Guinness Book of Records 1974 edition describes the walls of Benin City and its surrounding kingdom as the world's largest earthworks carried out prior to the mechanical era. According to estimates by the new scientist Fred Pearce, Benin City's walls were at one point 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China and consumed 100 times more material than the Great Pyramid of Khufu in Egypt. Situated on a plain, Benin City was enclosed by massive walls in the south and deep ditches in the north. Beyond the city walls, numerous further walls were erected that separated the surroundings of the capital into around 500 distinct villages. Pierce writes that these walls extended for some 16,000 kilometers in all, in a mosaic of more than 500 interconnected settlement boundaries. They covered 6,500 square kilometers and were all dug by the Edo people. They took an estimated 150 million hours to construct and are perhaps the largest single archaeological phenomenon on the planet. Benin City was also one of the first cities on Earth to have street lighting. Huge metal lamps, many feet high, were built and placed around the city. Fueled by palm oil, their burning wicks were lit at night to provide illumination for traffic to and from the palace and throughout the city. When the Portuguese first discovered Benin City in 1485, they were stunned to find this vast kingdom made of hundreds of interlocked cities and villages in the middle of the quote-unquote African jungle. They called it the Great City of Benin, and they classified Benin City as one of the most beautiful and best planned cities in the entire world. Benin City's planning and design was done according to careful rules of symmetry, proportionality, and repetition, now known as fractal design. The mathematician Ron Iglash, author of African Fractals, which examines the patterns underpinning architecture, art, and design in many parts of Africa, notes that Benin City and its surrounding villages were purposely laid out to form perfect fractals with similar shapes repeated in the rooms of each house, and the house itself, and the clusters of houses in the villages in mathematically predictable patterns. As he put it, when Europeans first came to Africa, they considered the architecture very disorganized and thus primitive. It never occurred to them that the Africans might have been using a form of mathematics that they hadn't even discovered yet. The major streets of Benin had underground drainage made of a sunken impluvium with an outlet to carry away stormwater. According to 17th century Dr. Vista Olfet Dapper, houses are built alongside the street in good order, the one close to the other. Adorned with gables and steps, they are usually broad with long galleries inside, especially so in the case of the houses of the nobility, and divided into many rooms which are separated by walls made of red clay very well erected. Dapper added that wealthy residents kept these walls as shiny and smooth by washing and rubbing as any wall in Holland can be made with chalk, and they're like mirrors. The upper stories are made of the same sort of clay. Moreover, every house is provided with a well for the supply of fresh water. So the early foreign explorers' description of Benin City portrayed it as a place free of crime and hunger, with large streets and houses kept clean, a city filled with courteous, honest people, and run by a centralized and highly sophisticated bureaucracy. At the height of its greatness in the 12th century, the kings and nobles of Benin City patronized craftsmen and lavished them with gifts and wealth in return for their depiction of the kings and dignitaries' great exploits in intricate bronze sculptures. Professor Felix von Luschen, formerly of the Berlin Ethnological Museum in Germany, wrote that these works from Benin are equal to the very finest examples of European casting technique. Benvenuto Cellini could not have cast them better, nor could anyone else before or after him. Technically, these bronzes represent the very highest possible achievement. European nations engaged in trade with the wealthy kingdom of Benin, importing ivory, palm oil and pepper, and exporting guns, surprise, surprise. At the beginning of the 16th century, words quickly spread around Europe about this beautiful African city of Benin, and new visitors flocked in from all parts of Europe with ever-glowing testimonies recorded in numerous voyage notes and illustrations. Benin City was destroyed in 1897 by British colonial invaders. Before burning the city down, the British looted it, taking many of its famous bronzes, ivory, and other treasures. The city of Meroe was the capital of the Kingdom of Kush for 1,000 years, from 590 BC to the 4th century AD. Situated in modern-day Sudan, the Kingdom of Kush, which housed the city of Meroe, was one of the earliest and most advanced states founded on the African continent. The site of the city of Meroe is marked by more than 200 pyramids, more than the number of pyramids in Egypt to the north, despite their smaller size. In the 5th century BC, Greek historian Herodotus described it as a great city said to be the mother city of the other Ethiopians. Meroe had a very advanced writing script, the Meroitic script, and record keeping was diligent. They had a very strong ironworking industry at a time when iron was one of the most important metals worldwide, and the metal workers of Meroe were among the best in the world, and the city was involved in extensive international trade with India and China. Meroe also exported textiles and jewelry. Their textiles were based on cotton, and its textile industry reached its highest point around 400 BC. Furthermore, the kingdom of Kush was very rich in gold, and so we have a really wealthy, advanced African civilization south of a really wealthy, advanced African civilization in Egypt. By 30 BC, Egypt, that's Kemet to the north, was under the rule of Roman invaders. This placed them in a really awkward situation with regard to Kush to the south, which was powerful and really uncomfortable with Roman presence in Africa. The Kushites engaged in various border skirmishes with the Romans on their border with Egypt, and they made many incursions into Egyptian territory in challenge of the Romans. In 23 BC, 7 years later, the Roman governor of Egypt, Publius Petronius, invaded Kush and sacked the Kushite holy city of Napata, looting their treasures. In retaliation, the Kushites crossed the lower border with Egypt, raided the cities and towns of southern Egypt, defeating Roman troops and standing their ground in a stalemate. A year later, a peace treaty was signed between Rome under Emperor Augustus and the Kushite pharaoh Ameniridas, a treaty which ensured that the Romans would not dare to invade any further lands south of Egypt. This treaty was observed for the entirety of Roman rule over Egypt and kept them firmly out of Meroe and the rest of Africa for 600 years, until 641 AD, when they were finally driven out of Africa by invading Arab jihadists. In June 2011, the archaeological site of the glorious city of Meroe of the Kushites was listed by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Timbuktu was the capital city of the Mali Empire. Situated in the west of the continent, Mali was a huge, vast empire that lasted from 800 AD to 1670, nearly 900 years. Under Mansa Musa, Mali's greatest leader, and by all accounts the richest human being who ever lived, Timbuktu became a world-renowned commercial city with caravan trade connections to Egypt, Turkey, Lebanon, Persia, and other nations. Knowledge and education were considered top priorities by Mali's emperors. Mali has the distinction of being home to one of the first universities on earth, the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, founded in 989 AD. At its peak, the university had an average attendance of about 25,000 students. The city of Timbuktu had 3 universities, Sankore University, Jingara Bay University, and Sidi Yahya University, and an estimated 180 schools. Books were more valuable than any other commodity in the city, and in the homes of local scholars were numerous private libraries with hundreds of thousands of volumes of works. It was really the 1500s that was Timbuktu's golden age of wealth and trade, and scholars from all walks of life and from all over the world converged on the city to exchange knowledge and wisdom. Leo Africanus, a historian of the 16th century, wrote about Timbuktu and said, "There are many judges, doctors and clerics here, all receiving good salaries from the king. He pays great respect to men of learning. There is a great demand for books, and more profit is made from the trade in books than from any other line of business." Mansa Musa built the 700-year-old Jingara Bay University in Timbuktu in 1325, which became a famous center of learning, attracting Muslim and non-Muslim students and intellectuals from Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Like other universities in Timbuktu, scholars at Jingara Bay studied surgical procedures, science, and mathematics. The University of Sankore produced thousands of black African scholars and leaders of the highest rank, character, and nobility. The subjects taught included medicine, mathematics, physics, astronomy, chemistry, philosophy, language, history, geography, art, law, Islamic studies, and literature. The university was a great intellectual institution, particularly during the 12th and 16th century, and attracted students and teachers from all over West and Central Africa and as far out as Turkey and Persia. Today, there are more than 700,000 manuscripts from the Mali Empire still surviving in public libraries and private collections, and they are now being digitalized. In December 1988, UNESCO granted World Heritage Site status to Timbuktu in recognition of its importance to world history. Timbuktu remains a famous, powerful symbol of Africa and her glorious civilization. the City of 100 Gates. The ancient Egyptian city of Noe, popularly known as Thebes, has been called the greatest city of ancient Black Africa. The ruins of Thebes lie within the modern Egyptian city of Luxor. Thebes was the capital of Egypt for a long period during the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom eras. Thebes had over 75,000 inhabitants, making it the largest city in the world in 1500 BC, a position it held for 600 years until around 900 BC, according to Stanford University scholar Ian Morris. The archaeological remains of Thebes offer a striking testimony to Egyptian civilization at its height. The Greek poet Homer praised the wealth of Thebes in his famous work, the Iliad, where he wrote that, "In Egyptian Thebes, the heaps of precious ingots gleam, the 100-gated Thebes." Thebes, of course, was known as the City of 100 Gates. According to legendary historian Chancellor Williams in his famous book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, references have been made to Thebes, and they may have seemed to be almost passing references. Yet, Thebes was the most important single city in the entire history of the Black people. The history of Black Africa might well begin at Thebes, for this was truly the eternal city of the Blacks that provided the most compelling evidence that they were the builders of Egyptian civilization. The foundation of Thebes, like the Black state of which it was the center, goes back so far in prehistory that not even a general Stone Age period can be suggested. Thebes was the intellectual center of Black Africa, where science, engineering, arts, and religion blossomed for centuries upon centuries. Let us never forget the central fact about Thebes, not even for a moment. For if the Blacks had never left a single written word of their past greatness, that record will still stand, defying time, in the deathless stones of Thebes, of her fallen columns from temples, monuments, and her pyramids, a city more eternal than Rome, because its foundation was laid before the dawn of history, and its plan was that copied by other cities of the world. If the Blacks of today want to measure the distance to the height from which they have fallen, they need go no further than Thebes. Honourable mention goes to these 5 great cities which narrowly missed our top 10 list: Aksum, Gao, Napata, Kilwa, Mombasa. Remember to check out our amazing African History Station wall art store for some really exclusive art from Africa's great civilizations in and outside the continent, most of which you will not find anywhere else. And you can take your living space to the next level with some big statements on the African past via authentic imagery and representation. And the link is right below your screen. Also, we have a new best-selling ebook out titled When Africa Colonized China, which you can check out in a link below as well. Thanks for watching this episode. Do remember to like, comment and subscribe, and look out for the next one on Africa's great civilizations.